What are the kinds of issues that I'm facing? Home ownership is unaffordable. Has the Republican Congress done anything about that? Absolutely not. The job market is cooked. It's cooked because of H-1B visas. It's cooked because of high-skilled and low-skilled immigration. Has the GOP done anything about that? Absolutely not. They sent us to war in Iraq, Afghanistan. Now they want us to fight a war in Iran. This country's cooked because of feminism. Things like no-fault divorce have made marriage very unattractive. Do Republicans even talk about that? Absolutely not. College is unaffordable. Have the Republicans tried to wipe student loans or make college more affordable? Absolutely not. Name one thing that the Republican Party has ever done explicitly for young white men, for their direct and tangible benefit. They have done nothing. They cut the corporate tax rate. They bombed Iran and Syria for Israel. They moved the embassy. They've deregulated the oil and gas industry, deregulated the tech industry. It's one struggle. Whites, blacks, against the Jews. So he might not like me saying he's my nigga, but we're all niggas, okay? I'm a nigga, you're a nigga, we're America's niggas. We're the world's niggas. We're the niggas of the world, you know? Israel wants to kill us all. We're all niggas. Israel trying to keep us all down. Am I right? That's right. That's right. Israel's trying to keep us all down. We're all niggas. We're all niggas here. It's okay. White, black, Cuban or Asian. White, black, red, brown, or yellow. We are all niggas to them. We are all goyim. So I don't care if you're a black nigga, white nigga. It is one struggle. If you're with God, if you're with America, I'm with you. The American.
This is Matthew chapter 12 and verse 25. And Yahushua knew their thoughts and said unto them, every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand. And if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself. How shall then his kingdom stand? I want to start off by giving all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahushua, Bahashem, Rakah, Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yashar Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word, in all truth and in sincerity. I want to go into a lesson based on those two clips from Nick Fuentes and what it speaks to concerning prophecy. All right, this is how we understand, according to prophecy, that we're at the end of an age. All right, because a kingdom is divided against itself. And for those who don't know, the kingdom that we exist in today is the kingdom of Esau, Edom, the so-called white man. And at this point, they are divided against themselves more so than ever before. You think about World War I, World War II, all the wars after that. Esau's been divided since they've stolen from everyone else. Well, now the war is being taken to another level, and it's being taken to a level of classism. All right, and I want to go into that term and deal with it because everything Nick Fuentes mentioned basically goes back from RutgersReview.com. It says the American dream is a common trope in much of the United States mythology. The core of its ethos is that with hard work and dedication, anybody can achieve success and prosperity. While optimism and perseverance are admirable traits, the path to financial success in the United States is not as simple and straightforward. The chances of one becoming wealthy in this country are slim to none, and there exist many barriers that impede upon those seeking opportunity. Now, I want to deal with this first and foremost because the whole construct of white, all right, and what it means to be so-called white was really established so that poor white people can still feel some form of privilege. This is where the term white privilege really comes from. Whereas the rich so-called white people can really have the privilege based off of their wealth. If anything, white privilege comes to the benefit of poor so-called white people, because their benefit is that they're not on the bottom, meaning they're still poor, yet they have some privilege above the so-called minorities around them. Now that that's being taken away, you're starting to see these complaints come from guys like Nick Fuentes and other right-wingers, where they're blaming the small hats, the so-called Jews, which you have a lot of wealthy so-called Jews, but it's really classism. When you really break it down and you look at it and you peel back all these terms of Zionism and all these different words, it's basically rich Edomites against poor Edomites. Because the small hats, the so-called Jews, are just so-called white people who have cosplayed as the chosen people of God, as the Israelites. Just like you have so-called white people in America who are cosplaying as Americans, even though they come from the British Empire. Similar to that, you had Alexander the Great, so-called great, Alexander the so-called Great, who was a Macedonian, but adopted himself as Alexander the Great. But they're all Edomites. The Russians, the Americans, the so-called Israelis, the Australians, the New Zealanders, the Canadians, they're all so-called white people. And at this point of the game, there's a transition from the so-called white privilege that used to cover all of the Edomites to now classism, which only affects the rich Edomites being given privilege, with everybody else being thrown into the food chain, which is why Nick Fuentes did that video and that clip of all of us being niggas to them. And really, he's saying to them is the small hats, but really it's the rich Edomites. All right, because you have a lot of rich Edomites that are really juiced in, and they don't consider themselves small hats. Yet it's a classism war. All right, so let's go down. It says these barriers range from discrimination based on income, race, religion, gender identity, and sexual orientation, the rising prices of higher education, single income households, the disenfranchisement of convicted felons, the accumulation of debt, and a lack of historical family wealth and inheritance. Today, there's an ever-rising gap in economic inequality. The middle class is declining and can soon become a non-existent entity, and more Americans are slipping into poverty. Now, the key word is the middle class. All right, the middle class is just a word being used for so-called white people who aren't dirt poor, but they aren't super rich. All right, they're somewhere in the middle. So when you hear the word middle class, it's not talking about you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. You don't necessarily qualify as the middle class, and if you do, you're at the bottom of that qualification. Keep in mind, when you deal with statistics, and depending on what data you look at, the average so-called Negro household has a wealth of between $30,000 and $40,000. All right. And then you deal with the wealth of a so-called white household. The average is around $250,000. Now, this isn't talking about income, meaning what they make according to their job per year. It's accumulated wealth. Whether they own a house, they receive some type of inheritance, whatever the case may be, their average household wealth, median wealth, is around $250,000, whereas with Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans, it's around $30,000 to $40,000. So you don't fall into the middle class concerning you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans. The reason I'm bringing this out is because that's what they're speaking to when they say the middle class is declining. And this is why you see so many Edomites who are on the internet crying and complaining, because ultimately they're being robbed by their own people. All right, now let's go here. This is Ecclesiastes chapter 14 and verse 5. It says, he that is evil to himself, to whom, you know what, let me start at 4. You know what, I got to start at 3. Ecclesiastes 14 and 3. Riches are not comely for a niggard, and what should an envious man do with money? And that embodies the mindset of the so-called white man. From the beginning, all right, when you look at chattel slavery, you didn't have a bunch of rich Edomites. The average Edomites, their whole calling card, their whole bragging rights was that they were better than niggas and they could pull you off the streets and kill you with impunity. They weren't the actual wealthy ones. The wealthy ones weren't the ones in the pictures, in the postcard pictures. Those weren't the super wealthy Edomites during chattel slavery. It was the average Joe Blow, Joe Six-Pack so-called white person in those pictures with their family. Because that was their bragging rights in their kingdom. So you think about a niggard at his table, instead of actually sharing the wealth, the only thing that they gave their own brethren was the title of being so-called white and the privilege that came with it. And now even that little privilege that they gave them is being taken away. This is why you have the average so-called white person saying where's their white privilege? Because it doesn't exist to them. Yeah, because your own people have taken it from you at this point. And that's a niggard at his table. He won't even share the wealth with his own people. That common wealth is being taken away from the rest of these Edomites. All right, now I want to continue at verse 4. It says, he that gathereth by defrauding his own soul gathereth for others that shall spend his goods riotously. He that is evil to himself, to whom will he be good? He shall not take pleasure in his goods. So you have to think, if they're willing to deny their own people health care, if they're willing to knowingly steal from their own people by allowing their 401ks to be invested in a private equity, by telling them that they're not going to tax overtime, but that's only if you make over $100,000. That's only if you make under $100,000, which doesn't help the skilled labor force of these Edomites. So he that is evil to himself, he that is willing to defraud his own people, where do you think the compassion is going to come from for you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans? It's non-existent. And I want to use the clips from Nick Fuentes, who is known to be a character, to say the least. But, he's known to be a so-called far right-wing extremist, so-called racist, which your racism don't really bother us at all. We expect that from Edomites. But what was shocking about it is that now they're coming to the realization that they're being robbed by their own people. Now, they may say it's the small hats. However, it's really your own people. Because who's allowing these policies to flow through Babylon the Great, which is America? It's American Edomites, American politicians who are being paid, who are being bribed to sell you under to throw you in the river, basically. And it's all beautiful because what the Lord is doing is he's stoking up prophecy. All right, this is Isaiah chapter 19 and 2. You know what? I'm going to start at 2. It says, I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians, and they shall fight everyone against his brother, and everyone against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof, and I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols and to the charmers, and to them that have familiar spirits, and to the wizards. Now I want to jump down to verse 14. It says, the Lord hath mingled a perverse spirit in the midst thereof, and they have caused Egypt to err in every work thereof, as a drunken man staggereth in his vomit. Neither shall there be any work for Egypt, which the head or tail, branch or rush may do. And see, that's what's happening. The money is drying up because it's being consolidated. So instead of that wealth being spread across the so-called white American nation, it's now being consolidated to the rich Edomites. And this is why you hear this cry from them saying that we're all in it together now. Because now you're being robbed by your own people. And now you want to enlist the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans to fight for you to get your wealth back. None of these Edomites had a problem when it was you Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans on the bottom. They blamed you not having a father in the household. They blamed everything except the institution of Babylon the Great, the system that Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans grew up under for our situation. And now it's happening to the average so-called white person, and they're saying we all bleed red. That's not the case. And this is why prophecy is so important, because the Lord let us know what time we will be living in and how to conduct ourselves in it. Because ultimately, it's going to break out into sedition. All of these conversations from guys like Nick Fuentes, eventually it's going to leave the internet. It's going to leave these talking platforms, and it's going to be transferred into action as people's very lives are diminishing before them. You think about an average so-called white family who has a net worth or a wealth of $250,000, and watching that money just fall like water with a hole in the bucket, just watching it all drain out. Edomites are going to react the way Edomites react. And that ultimately goes into prophecy, because the scriptures talk about sedition. All right, it's 2nd Esdras 15. And I'm going to jump down to verse 14. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein, for the sword and their destruction draweth nigh. And one people shall stand up and fight against another, and swords in their hands. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. And this is why guys like Trump are moving so fast to set up this infrastructure, because they understand that they're dealing with the average Edomite and their mentality. And their mentality is that when their back is against the wall, they get violent. So Trump, which was a Trojan horse, he told the average so-called white person, we're going to restore that American greatness. But really, he's working for the elites as well, to build that barrier between the rich and poor. And this is why they're working so hard to set up this digital infrastructure, because at that point, your guns don't matter. I mean, you can shoot it out, but ultimately, if they can stop your pockets, if they can stop your necessities, if you can't buy or sell without their system, they can just pull the mask off and say, look, it's rich versus poor. We don't care what race you are. And really, it's poetic through the spirit, because it's the average so-called white person really is the last person to get the message and what's happening to them. You know, they wore these MAGA hats and they walked around thinking that Trump was going to be their savior. And really, he just sold them down the river. And now you don't see so many of them wearing those MAGA hats no more, because the writing is starting to become more clear as they look at the wall. But that's ultimately going to equal into sedition, because you have more guns in Babylon the Great, which is America, than you have people. And most of them are owned by these Edomites, not just the rich, but the average Edomites. And they're going to react violently as they have to recognize that they're a victim of classism. It's beautiful. All right, real quick, I'm going to jump down to this. It says, in many ways, it is expensive to be poor, and being from a lower income household makes success much harder to attain. The effects of poverty can lead to stress, and studies have shown that lower class Americans exhibit higher signs of anxiety and mental illness. And Trump played on the mental illness of his own people by telling them that he was going to restore them, just to finesse them. But as the scriptures say, he who charmeth the serpent, all right, Salakia, roughly paraphrasing, let me just grab it. It's Ecclesiastes 12, and I'm going to jump down to 13. It says, who will pity a charmer that is bitten with a serpent, or any such as come nigh wild beasts? Y'all got everything y'all got from stealing, robbing, violence, deception, and now it's being done to y'all, and you want somebody to pity you. No. It's poetic. You know, the scriptures say the Lord is not mocked. This is beautiful. How you started is how you're finishing. You started on deception, and now deception is being used against you, and you don't like it. And it's the Lord dismantling this system from the inside. All right, now I want to go back to that, because brothers make this observation all the time, that Edomites don't do well with adversity, man. You know, Jake is able to walk with a smile on their face with $1,200 in their bank account, and every dollar has to go to some type of bill, and they still walk around with a smile on their face, and they still have this optimistic attitude. Esau get down to $5K in the bank and just take a swan dive off a building, man. So imagine what they're gonna do when they find out that their own people have finessed them in a real way. They're going to turn this shit upside down. Excuse my French. Now, I want to jump down to this. Let me jump down to... Yep. So it says, today the American dream is still an idea present in the culture, regardless of the barriers that exist that prevent social mobility. And see, a lot of Edomites were operating under this illusion that they too can become that rich Edomite. This is why they protect the other Edomites, the rich Edomites, at their own expense. When you look at the policies in Babylon the Great, which is America, the Democratic and the liberal policies benefit the average so-called white person more than the Republican policies. But because they believe one day they'll reach that economic club, they protect the rich Edomites. And this has been the game since chattel slavery and then Reconstruction. It's protecting the rich Edomites in hopes that one day we'll be there. And even our people have adopted that delusion. But now reality is starting to make people have to address that delusion head on. And they're going to react violently when they have to. All right. Continuing, it says, the history of the United States is one that involved colonization, slavery, and heavy use of social and racial stratification. Wealth was established by the extremely privileged through methods of exploitation and extraction of labor. Through chattel slavery, indentured servitude, mass incarceration, and low-wage service jobs, there has always existed an underclass designated to populate the bottom of society. And now they're throwing their people in that pot too. That's what Nick Fuentes really is speaking to. You just have to dig through all the words and take your feelings out of it. Because again, these Edomites, they're supposed to do this. They're supposed to be racist. They're supposed to be against us. That's how the Lord set them up. They doing their job. All right, continuing. It says, in the current scheme of things, there is an ever-increasing power gap due to major corporations enjoying little to no regulation, the rise of big banks and private prisons, the decrease of public education quality, and the increasing poverty rates. However, in recent years, the push for understanding the theory of intersectionality. All right, let's get this word real quick. Intersectionality says the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. All right, it says, and I'm going to read that again. However, in recent years, the push for understanding the theory of intersectionality and how various injustices coincide has been beneficial to combating classism. As noted in this article, classism remains a strong foundation in maintaining and legitimizing many of the established biases, systems, and more potently, the status quo in the United States. And when you think about it, that has always been the status quo of Babylon the Great, which is America. Rich Edomites telling the poor Edomites that it's somebody else to blame for why they're poor. And that the only benefit that they have, at least one benefit they have, is that they're better than the so-called minorities that they live amongst. This was the strategy. And this is why the scripture talk about Esau, the so-called white man, being a niggard at his table. Because instead of actually spreading the wealth to the rest of their nation, they just told them lies. They told them, look, you're better than the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans because you're so-called white. Even if you're poor, you got to stay and live around them. And before that, they were telling them, look, you're genetically superior. So even if you are just as broke as the so-called Negro, Latino, or Native American, you got better genes. And that worked for a while. But now the little bit of comfort the so-called white man has been able to accumulate on this side is now being taken by the rich ones of his people as their greed becomes increasingly high. They have more than heart could wish, and now they've robbed everybody on the planet. And the only people left to rob is each other. That's why this is all poetic. All right, I'm going to finish it off. It says, in order to end systemic prejudice in the U.S., Classism must also be addressed and more conversations on it must prevail. Discussions on political, legal, and social solutions to class inequality must persist. As long as there exists a class structure and a designation of haves and have-nots, this will continue to enable inequality and the disadvantage of targeted groups. And this is the importance of the digital infrastructure that the elites are creating, because it's going to control the masses. Outside of them just actually depopulating people, having people under severe control is another way to maintain that status quo. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise. Matter of fact, let me get this. Because eventually they're going to have to give it all back. All right, and that's the beauty of it, through the spirit and power of Yahweh Shema Shai. All right, this is Job 20:18. That which he labored for shall he restore, and shall not swallow it down. According to his substance shall the restitution be, and he shall not rejoice therein. All right, so Lord willing, this was edifying with that. I want to give all praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Rakah Kodash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone, who are the elders of Yasha Allah, and a sincere salutation to all Yuakim, who are preaching this word and believing this word, and to the Akwath, who are believing this word in all truth and in sincerity.